I refused to let my mother-in-law name my baby, and now she's furious. I never thought something as simple as naming my baby would cause such a massive rift in my relationship with my mother-in-law. But here I am, stuck in the middle of a family feud that I never asked for, all because I refused to let her name my child. The tension between us has reached a boiling point, and honestly, I'm not sure if there's any coming back from this. Let me take you through the whole story, the shocking moments, the arguments, and the consequences that I never saw coming. From the moment I found out I was pregnant, the advice and opinions from everyone, especially my in-laws, began pouring in. But nothing could have prepared me for the constant pressure from my mother-in-law, Linda, when it came to naming our baby. At first it was subtle, a suggestion here and there, a casual comment about a name she liked. I tried to brush it off, assuming it was just excitement on her part. After all, it was her first grandchild, and I knew how much she wanted to be involved. But then it started to get more intense. As my pregnancy progressed, Linda would call me weekly to ask, "Have you decided on a name yet? And more specifically, have you considered the name Josephine for a girl or Alexander for a boy? They run in the family, you know." It was clear she had already chosen a name in her mind. I felt a knot in my stomach every time the conversation turned to baby names. I wasn't sure if it was the hormones or just the pressure of the situation, but I started to feel like I was losing control of a decision that should have been ours alone to make. My husband, Jake, had been relatively quiet about the whole thing. He didn't seem to have strong feelings either way, so I assumed he was just going along with whatever I decided. After all, he knew how much I valued being able to choose a name that felt right to me. But the more Linda pushed, the more I realized this wasn't just about the name. It was about control. Linda wasn't just trying to suggest names. She was trying to dictate the narrative of my pregnancy and, by extension, my child's life. I remember one afternoon when Jake and I were sitting in the living room, scrolling through baby name books. It was supposed to be a fun bonding moment, but it quickly turned into a stressful discussion. Linda had called again, practically begging me to consider Josephine. "It's such a beautiful name," she said. "It's a family name, and it would mean so much to me." I tried to be polite. "It's a lovely name, but I just don't feel like it's right for us. We've been thinking of other options." But Linda wasn't having it. "You're overthinking it," she insisted. "It's tradition. Josephine is a beautiful name, and I don't understand why you'd want to ignore such a meaningful family tradition." The pressure was building. I could feel the weight of her expectations, and every conversation left me more frustrated. I needed to make a decision, but it felt like I was being backed into a corner by someone who wasn't even the one carrying the baby. It wasn't long before Linda's relentless suggestions turned into something much worse. As the weeks went by, I started to feel like my pregnancy wasn't just about the baby. I was being treated like a vessel for someone else's vision. Linda's insistence on Josephine became more demanding, and every time I tried to express my thoughts on a different name, she would shoot them down. One day, during a family dinner, she dropped the bombshell. We were all gathered around the table, laughing and talking about wedding plans, when Linda turned to me and said, "I'm just so happy you're finally agreeing on Josephine. I think it's the perfect name, and I've already started planning her christening. I can't wait for my little Josephine to be born." I almost choked on my water. "Wait, what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I never said we decided on Josephine. We haven't even settled on a name yet." Linda waved me off as if it was no big deal. "Oh, don't be silly. It's such a beautiful name, and I know you'll agree once you see her. Everyone in the family will love it. I've even talked to Jake about it." Jake looked uncomfortable, his face flushed. He hadn't said a word, and I could tell he was just trying to avoid the confrontation. But it was too much for me. I wasn't just being pushed aside. I was being completely disregarded. "No, Linda, we haven't agreed on anything," I said firmly, trying to keep my composure. "I haven't even had a chance to suggest any names yet. This is not just your decision, and I won't let you take over." The room went silent. Jake looked between the two of us, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. Linda's smile faded, and I could see the shift in her eyes. This wasn't just about a name anymore. This was about control, and she was not used to not getting her way. "I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this," Linda said, her voice tight with frustration. "It's tradition. You can't just ignore family history." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't about tradition. It was about her trying to force her vision onto me. I had tried to be polite, but this was my child, and I wouldn't let her make me feel guilty for wanting to make that decision myself. "I am not being difficult, Linda," I snapped, my patience finally wearing thin. "I'm just not going to let you name my child. I don't care if it's a family name or not. It's not your decision to make." Linda's face went red with anger. "I'm just trying to help," she said, her voice rising. "You don't know what's best for your baby. I've raised children. I know what's best for the family. You're being selfish." That was the breaking point. I stood up from the table, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. "No, Linda, I'm not being selfish. I'm being a mother. And I will make decisions for my child without you telling me what's best. You need to back off, or you're going to lose any chance of being involved in this." There was an awkward silence, and the tension in the room was unbearable. Jake didn't say anything, and Linda was staring at me like I had just slapped her in the face. For a brief moment, I thought she might apologize, but instead, she stood up from the table with tears in her eyes. "You're making a huge mistake," she whispered before walking out of the room without another word. I sat there, heart pounding, feeling like I had just set off a bomb in the middle of my family. I hadn't expected her to react that way, but I wasn't going to back down. I had to stand my ground, and I knew that if I didn't, I'd be letting Linda walk all over me for the rest of my life. But as I looked at Jake, I could see the concern in his eyes. His silence was more deafening than anything Linda had said. The silence after Linda stormed out was suffocating. The air felt thick with tension, and I could tell Jake was struggling to process what had just happened. I had made my decision, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just created an irreparable rift in my relationship with his family. It wasn't just about the name anymore. It was about how everything had boiled over so quickly. Jake sat there, his elbows resting on the table, staring at the spot where his mom had been. "I can't believe you said that to her," he muttered, shaking his head. "She's been so excited about the baby, and now you've completely shut her out." I felt my stomach drop. "I didn't shut her out, Jake. I just told her the truth. This isn't about her. It's about us and our baby. I'm not going to let her steamroll me into doing something I don't want." Jake ran a hand through his hair, looking stressed. "I know, but she's my mom. You don't understand how much she's been looking forward to this. This is all she's talked about for the past few months. I just don't want to lose her over something like this." I could feel the tension building. "And what about me, Jake? What about our family? We're the ones raising this child. It's our decision, not hers." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was tired of tiptoeing around the issue. It wasn't just about a name, it was about respect. I had tried to be patient, tried to include Linda in the process, but it had gotten to a point where I felt like I was being ignored and manipulated. "I get it, okay?" Jake snapped back, his voice rising. "But this is complicated. You don't just get to tell her off like that, especially when she's been so involved in everything. She's been planning, preparing, making everything about the baby. Now you've gone and ruined it all." I was stunned. This wasn't the conversation I was expecting. I thought we were on the same team, that he understood why I made the decision. But now, I was starting to feel like he was siding with his mom. "I'm not trying to ruin anything, Jake," I said, my voice softening. "But I can't keep letting her push me around. You saw how she was treating me. You heard the things she said. You can't keep saying it's fine when she's blatantly disregarding me." He stood up, pacing in frustration. "It's just, I didn't think it would get this bad. I didn't expect you to shut her out completely." It hit me then. This wasn't just about the baby's name. It was about family dynamics. Jake wasn't seeing the bigger picture. His mom had always been the one in control, and now he was struggling to let go of that control. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just a name issue. It was a fundamental clash of values. "You don't get it," I said quietly, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "I'm not shutting her out. I'm protecting our family. I'm standing up for us, Jake. You need to understand that." Jake didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, lost in his thoughts. I could see the internal battle he was fighting, the part of him that was torn between me and his family, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. "I think I need some space," Jake finally said, his voice low. "I'm going to go to my mom's for a while. I need to clear my head." Before I could respond, he grabbed his jacket and left, leaving me alone in the empty house. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I hadn't expected Jake to take Linda's side, but I hadn't expected him to leave either. It felt like everything was falling apart, After Jake left, I was left alone with my thoughts, feeling the weight of the entire situation on my shoulders. The house that had once felt like a safe haven now felt like a cold, empty space. I had always imagined this time in my life to be filled with excitement, picking baby names, planning for the future, enjoying every moment of my pregnancy. Instead, it was filled with stress, conflict, and the sinking feeling that everything I thought I knew was unraveling. For the next few days, Jake stayed at his mom's place. We barely communicated. He sent a few texts, but they were short and impersonal. "I need space. I'll be back soon. Can we talk when I get home?" It felt like he was avoiding me, and I was left to deal with the fallout alone. The worst part was that I wasn't sure if he was trying to fix things with his mom, or if he was just trying to process everything. I had no idea where he stood anymore. I spent most of the days trying to keep busy, but the constant anxiety and uncertainty made it impossible to focus. I kept replaying the argument in my head, wondering if I could have handled things differently. Maybe I should have been more patient. Maybe I should have tried to compromise a little more. But every time I thought about it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done the right thing. I had to put my foot down. I had to stand up for myself. If I let Linda push me around now, she would keep doing it, and it would never stop. On the third day, I finally decided to call Jake. I was tired of waiting and wondering. I needed answers. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk?" There was a pause on the other end. "Yeah," he replied, his tone distant. "I'm coming back home soon." I could hear the hesitancy in his voice, and it made my stomach churn, but I didn't have time to dwell on that. I needed to know where we stood. I needed to know if we could move forward, or if everything had already fallen apart. When he returned home, the atmosphere between us was thick with tension. He didn't immediately come into the living room where I was sitting, and I could hear him pacing in the hallway. I wasn't sure what he was thinking, but I couldn't just sit there and wait anymore. I stood up, walked into the hallway, and faced him. "Jake," I said, my voice firm but soft, "we need to talk about this. I can't keep pretending everything is okay. I've been patient, but I need to know where we go from here." He looked at me, his face tired but conflicted. "I don't know what to say. I'm torn. Your name? I love you, but this whole thing with my mom, it's complicated." I nodded, the lump in my throat growing. "I understand it's complicated, but you need to make a decision. I can't keep waiting for you to choose between me and your mom. I don't want to be put in the middle of this anymore." Jake stayed silent for a long moment, and I could tell he was thinking hard about what to say next. Finally, he spoke up, his voice quieter than before. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, "but I'm willing to try. I don't want to lose you over this. I don't want my family's drama to tear us apart." I sighed with relief, but I knew this wasn't over. It was a start, but it wasn't the solution. He had said he was willing to try, but trying wasn't enough. I needed him to take real action. I needed him to show me that he understood how important this was. "You need to talk to your mom, Jake," I said, my voice steady. "You need to set boundaries with her. She can't keep pushing me around, and you need to be the one to stand up to her. If you want this to work, I need to know you'll support me." He looked down at his feet, nodding slowly. "I will. I promise." But even as he said it, I couldn't shake the doubt that lingered in my mind. Words were easy, actions were hard. Would he really stand up to his mom? Would he really choose me, our future, over the toxic family dynamic that had been in place for so long? I wasn't sure, but I couldn't keep waiting for him to figure it out. A few days passed after Jake's promise to try and fix things. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was still feeling a mix of hope and skepticism. Jake had left the house once again to meet his mom, and this time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know what was said. I had been through so many emotional roller coasters already, and each time he came back with a vague answer, it chipped away at my confidence in the situation. When Jake returned that evening, he looked exhausted but oddly determined. I could tell he had something to say, but he was holding it in, unsure of how to break the news. I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to know where we stood. "Jake, what happened?" I asked, not even bothering to sit down. I stood there, staring at him, waiting for him to answer. He took a deep breath and finally spoke. "We had a long conversation," he said, his voice quiet. "It wasn't easy, but I think she finally understood where I was coming from." My heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Had he really stood his ground with his mom? "I told her," Jake continued, "that we needed to make this wedding about us, not about her. I told her that the name was your decision and that I wasn't going to let her push us around anymore. I felt a rush of relief flood over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when Ryan finally took action. But there was still a small part of me that was cautious, unsure whether this change in attitude would last. "But there's more," Jake added, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "She was upset. She cried, and it got really emotional, but in the end, she agreed to back off. She knows that I'm serious, and I think she's starting to understand how much this means to both of us." I stared at him for a moment, processing what he had just said. It felt like everything I had hoped for was finally coming to fruition, but there was still a lingering sense of unease. "Are you sure, Jake? Are you really sure she's going to back off?" "I think she will," he replied, his voice soft but firm. "She didn't like hearing it, but I think she knows that I mean it. I'm not going to let her control this anymore. I know it's been hard on you, and I know I haven't always stood up for you in the past, but I'm ready to change that." His words were exactly what I had wanted to hear, but a tiny part of me still couldn't shake the doubts. Could this really be the end of the battle? Could I trust that things would go back to normal? My heart was racing, but I also knew that the only way forward was for both of us to commit to this new direction. "Thank you, Jake," I said, my voice shaky but filled with gratitude. "I can't tell you how much this means to me. I just want us to be happy, and I don't want anything or anyone coming between us." He walked over to me and hugged me tightly. "I don't want that either. Let's move forward together, okay? We'll get through this." In that moment, I allowed myself to believe that we could move past the drama, the tension, and the hurt. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but Jake and I had finally aligned on something so important, and that gave me hope. Just when I thought things were starting to settle down, something unexpected happened. It was a week after Jake's conversation with his mom, and I had cautiously allowed myself to believe that we had turned a corner. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs, especially when it comes to family dynamics. I was sitting at home, working on some wedding details when Jake came in, looking a little too calm for my liking. His face didn't show the usual signs of tension, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made me uneasy. It was the same feeling you get when you know something is off, but you can't quite put your finger on it. "Hey," I said, trying to read his expression. "What's up? How was everything with your mom?" He sat down beside me on the couch, rubbing his temples. "It's complicated," he began. "She says she's trying to understand, but it's like she's bottling up her feelings and projecting them onto everyone else." I sighed, knowing that this wasn't going to be as simple as it seemed. "What do you mean? I thought you two talked it through." "We did," he replied, his voice low. "But when I left her house, she said something that really got to me. She said I was choosing you over her, and that if I didn't make things right with the family, she'd pull out of the wedding. She said that this could ruin everything." I felt a stab in my chest. "She said that? Seriously?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, she's trying to guilt-trip me again. But the thing is, I can't go back on my word now. I've already told her how I feel, and I don't want to be stuck in this cycle where I'm constantly trying to appease her. I don't want you to feel like I'm betraying you." As much as I wanted to feel relieved by Jake's words, something didn't sit right. I knew Linda had a tendency to manipulate situations, but this felt different. She wasn't just upset about the name anymore. She was trying to use emotional blackmail to control him, and by extension, she was trying to control me. "Jake, I understand that she's your mom, but this can't keep happening. She's using guilt to manipulate you into doing what she wants. This isn't just about the wedding, it's about her trying to get her way, no matter the cost." Jake's face hardened, his frustration evident. "I know, and I hate it. But this is the reality of the situation. She's not going to let go easily, and if she does pull out of the wedding, it's going to make things worse." I didn't know what to say at that moment. Everything I thought I had won felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Linda's manipulation wasn't just about the wedding. It was about her inability to let go and accept that things were changing. She wasn't just fighting over a name anymore. She was fighting for control, and she wasn't going to back down. As the days went by, I couldn't shake the thought of Linda's emotional manipulation. She was like a storm, always lurking in the background, trying to disrupt everything. I had hoped that by standing my ground on the name, things would finally settle, but instead, they seemed to be escalating. The tension between Jake and his mom was palpable, and I could see it starting to take its toll on him. I spent more time thinking about the situation, trying to figure out what the best course of action was. I loved Jake, but I couldn't let his mom dictate the terms of our relationship. This was about more than just a wedding. It was about setting the foundation for our future. If I allowed Linda to continue exerting control over us now, it would only get worse down the road. One night, as I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, it hit me. I had to make a decision too, not just about the wedding, but about my relationship with Jake. If we were going to move forward together, he had to see this for what it really was. I couldn't keep pretending that everything would magically work out if we just played along with his family's demands. The next morning, I called Jake and asked if we could meet at the park. I needed to talk to him face to face, away from the pressure of our home and his family's influence. When we sat down, I could immediately tell that he was tense. He had been ruminating over everything for days, and I could feel the weight of his indecision pressing down on him. "Jake, I love you. I really do," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "But this situation is tearing me apart. I can't keep fighting for us while you're still caught between me and your mom. It's not fair to either of us." Jake looked at me, a mix of regret and frustration in his eyes. "I know, but I don't want to lose you, your name. I don't want my mom to ruin everything, but she's making it so hard to just move on and accept it. I'm not asking you to choose between me and your family, Jake, but I need to know that I'm not fighting this alone. If I'm going to marry you, I need to know that you'll have my back, no matter what. I need to know that we're a team." Jake took a deep breath, his eyes softening. "I don't want to let her control everything, but she's my mom, and I don't know how to deal with her without losing her." I paused for a moment, carefully considering my words. "You can't keep trying to please her at the expense of our relationship. We can't keep tiptoeing around her feelings. It's not healthy for either of us. I'm not going to be your second priority. I need you to make a choice, not between me and her, but between continuing to let her run things or standing up for us." For a moment, Jake was silent. His hands were clenched tightly on his lap, and I could see the internal struggle playing out in his mind. He didn't know how to move forward without causing a rift with his family, but I could see the resolve building in his eyes. He had to choose, and I needed him to make that choice. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady. "I don't want to lose you, and I know I've been letting my mom's expectations get in the way of us. I'm sorry. I promise I'll do better. We'll set boundaries, and I'll make it clear that I'm putting you and our future first." The weight that had been sitting on my chest for weeks started to lift, but I knew it wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Ryan had made a choice, but now we had to stick to it. We couldn't let Linda's manipulation derail everything we had worked for. A few days after our conversation, Jake finally gathered the courage to confront his mom. We knew it wasn't going to be an easy conversation, but it was the only way to move forward. For the first time, I felt like Jake was really ready to stand up to Linda and put our relationship first. It felt like a turning point, but part of me was still anxious about how everything would play out. I stayed home that day, letting Jake handle the situation on his own. I wanted him to be the one to have this conversation with her. After all, it was his family. I knew I couldn't keep doing all the heavy lifting when it came to setting boundaries. This had to come from him if we were ever going to truly move forward. It was late afternoon when Jake came back. He walked in with his hands in his pockets, looking exhausted but relieved. I could tell from his expression that the conversation had gone differently than I had expected. "Jake?" I asked, my voice trembling with anticipation. He gave me a small smile, but it was laced with a hint of uncertainty. "It went better than I thought. She wasn't happy at all, but I told her that I was putting us first, that we were starting our own family now, and I needed her to respect our boundaries." I couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Linda hadn't gotten her way, and Jake had made it clear that he wasn't going to let her manipulate him anymore. But even as I felt a rush of gratitude, I couldn't ignore the lingering fear that this wouldn't be the end of it. Linda wasn't one to back down easily, and I had no doubt she would find ways to keep inserting herself into our lives. Jake sat down beside me, taking my hand. I told her she could be involved in the wedding, but only if she respected our decisions. If she couldn't, I said she was welcome to stay away. She didn't like that, but I think she's starting to get it. I gave him a reassuring smile. "That's good. It's not easy, but it's what needed to happen. We've got to protect our peace, Jake." For the next few days, things were tense, but I noticed a subtle shift in Jake. He was more confident, more sure of his decisions. It wasn't just about standing up to Linda. It was about standing up for us. I saw him making small changes, cutting back on visits to his mom's house, setting firmer boundaries, and actually prioritizing our plans over his family's demands. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Then, one evening, Jake and I were sitting on the couch, sipping wine, and talking about the wedding. It felt like things were starting to settle, when Jake dropped another bombshell. "Linda called me today," he said, his voice slightly tense. "She said she's thinking of attending the wedding, but only if we change the seating arrangements." I frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean by that?" He sighed. "She wants me to sit her and my dad at the head table instead of your parents. She says they're the ones who've been supporting us financially, and that's where they should be." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had worked so hard to make this wedding reflect both our families, but I wasn't going to let Linda continue to manipulate the situation. This was the last straw. "No, Jake. This is our wedding, not hers. Your parents can sit at the head table if they want, but my parents are just as important. You can't let her push us around anymore." I could see the frustration building in Jake's eyes, and I knew how hard it was for him to go against his mom. But this was it, the final test. Would he stand firm, or would he let Linda dictate everything? I know, Jake said, looking defeated. "It's just, she's making everything so complicated." "I don't care if it's complicated. We've been dealing with this for too long. We can't let her make decisions for us anymore. We need to tell her this is our day, and if she can't respect that, then she doesn't need to be there." Jake looked at me, his eyes softening. "You're right. I'm done with this." The conversation with Jake was the turning point I had been waiting for. I could see it in his eyes. He was finally fed up. This wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about protecting our relationship from constant interference. He was ready to stop letting his family dictate the terms, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were on the same page. Jake called his mom the next day. I could hear his voice as he spoke to her in the other room, calm but firm. He told her that the wedding was going to be exactly how we had planned it, and if she didn't like it, she didn't have to attend. He told her that her manipulative tactics weren't going to work, and if she didn't respect our choices, she'd have to accept the consequences. I could hear Linda's voice rising through the phone, her anger unmistakable. I didn't want to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help but listen. My heart was racing as I heard Jake set boundaries for the first time in our relationship. After a tense few minutes, Jake hung up the phone and walked into the living room. His face was pale, but there was a certain relief in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Well, she didn't take it well," Jake said, sitting down beside me. "But I think she finally gets it. I told her she can either respect us or stay away. It's up to her now." I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to be happy that Jake had finally stood up to her, but another part of me felt like we were only at the beginning of a much longer journey. Linda was stubborn, and I knew she wouldn't just let this go. But in that moment, I felt like we had taken control of our lives, and that gave me hope. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. We didn't know whether Linda would come around or not, and we weren't sure how the rest of the family would react. But Jake and I kept moving forward with our wedding plans, confident that we had made the right decision. We focused on each other, on the love we shared, and on the future we were building together. Then, a week before the wedding, Jake received a message from Linda. It was brief and to the point. "I'll be attending the wedding, but I won't sit at the head table. I'll respect your wishes." I couldn't believe it. Linda had backed down. It wasn't ideal, but she had finally respected our wishes, and that was a huge step forward. Jake showed me the message, and we both shared a look of disbelief. We had weathered the storm, and now we were ready to move forward. I could finally start enjoying the wedding planning again, knowing that we had set the foundation for a healthier relationship with his family. The day of the wedding finally arrived, and with it came a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and relief. After everything that had happened with Jake's family, I had no idea what to expect. Linda had agreed to attend, though she wasn't sitting at the head table as she initially demanded. I had spent the past few days making sure that everything else was in place, and despite the lingering tension, the day was shaping up to be as beautiful as I had imagined. As I put on my wedding dress, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led to this moment. The challenges, the arguments, the emotional roller coaster, it had all been building to this point. And now, standing in front of the mirror, I felt a strange sense of pride. I had stood my ground. I had fought for my happiness, for my future with Jake. It wasn't easy, but I had done it. Jake was by my side, of course, but we hadn't spoken much in the final hours before the ceremony. We were both anxious, not just about the wedding, but about how the day would unfold with his family present. Would Linda respect the boundaries we had set? Would there be any more drama, or would the day go off without a hitch? The ceremony began, and the moment I walked down the aisle, everything seemed to fall into place. The tension I had been holding on to for months started to dissolve, and as I looked into Jake's eyes, I knew I was making the right choice. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about starting a new chapter in our lives, one that we would build together, free from the control and manipulation of others. When we exchanged vows, I could see the emotion on Jake's face. He had finally realized that our love was stronger than the influence of his family. I could see the way he was looking at me, not with doubt, but with admiration. I knew that, no matter what happened with his family in the future, we had each other. During the reception, things felt strangely peaceful. Linda kept to herself for the most part, sitting at a table with some of the extended family members. She didn't try to make any more demands, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory in that. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The rest of the night went smoothly, and I couldn't help but smile as Jake and I danced under the stars, finally feeling like we had taken control of our lives. As we left the venue that night, hand in hand, I reflected on how far we'd come. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when I wasn't sure if we'd make it. But in the end, standing up for ourselves had made all the difference. We had faced our challenges head on, and we were stronger for it. When I look back on everything that happened leading up to our wedding, I realized that standing up for myself and for my relationship was the most important decision I could have made. It wasn't about being right or wrong. It was about ensuring that we had control over our future and that no one, no matter how well-intentioned, could dictate our happiness. If you're dealing with similar struggles in your relationships, whether it's with family, friends, or anyone else, my advice is simple. Set your boundaries and stick to them. You have the right to prioritize your happiness and your future. Don't let anyone manipulate you into sacrificing what's best for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand your ground in a similar situation? How did it turn out for you? Share your experiences in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Let's continue supporting each other in the journey of standing strong and setting boundaries.